Welcome back to the channel, everybody. And today is the first in a series where we're going to be looking back at some Tottenham classic matches from the past. And today we're going to be looking back to our 1982 FA Cup final win in a game that went to a replay. The first game at Wembley, Tottenham versus QPR. The first game ended 1-1. Glenn Hoddle scoring first in extra time for us. But then Terry Fenwick would get a late equaliser in extra time, a player who would go on to play for Spurs at some point in the future after that, got a late equaliser that then sent the game into a replay. Now, the replay was played in the evening, and obviously at that time, QPR were a second division side. So Spurs went into this final as real favourites. But over both games, QPR did themselves really proud. And ultimately, in the replay, as we'll find out as we discuss it, were unfortunate not again to come away with getting themselves something out of the game and at least taking it to penalty shootout. Now, this game was interesting because both teams played in their away kits in both games. And the reason that was because the FA at the time decided that both home kits predominantly had far too much white and that one team would need to change. But they didn't feel that was fair. So they asked both teams to wear their away kits. And that way felt that one team didn't particularly have the advantage over the other at all. So let's get into the replay and the game. And Spurs started the game really strongly and actually got themselves on the ball. Were playing some reasonable football. And in the 7th minute of the game, Graham Roberts managed to pick the ball up on the halfway line. And in what is one of those iconic kind of runs that you'll see on compilation videos, picked the ball up and just started going forward and dribbling and just kept going. And he managed to get himself right towards the edge of the box. And then at the time, unfortunately, it was a QPR defender who kind of, Bob Hazel, his name was, and he really sold himself and went in to try and tackle Graham, but completely mistimed his tackle and sold himself. And Graham then ended up being inside the box. And at that point was then brought down to give us a penalty in the 7th minute. Now, obviously, at that period of time, Glenn Hoddle stepped up and nicely buried the penalty for us. And you couldn't have asked for a better start to a cup final than that for Spurs. And then the game kind of just settled down into a real close encounter in the first half. And I think, having watched it back again, Spurs probably just edged it and had the kind of more of the ball and were kind of trying to probe. But at the same time, QPR weren't just sitting back. They were kind of trying to go forward as well. And just before half time, had the ball in the back of the net. But fortunately for us, it was ruled out as offside. And Spurs went into the break leading the cup final replay 1-0. Now, the second half was a completely different story because QPR came out and they really had the bit between their teeth in the second half, as you would expect for a side losing and knowing that they would need to get themselves back in the game to stand any chance of taking the cup final, either at least to extra time or try and get themselves back in it and win it. And like I say, they started the second half really brightly and started putting Spurs under a lot of pressure. And at this point, Spurs' long season, because I think this was something like the 60th game of the season for Spurs, started to really look like it was showing. And we were really looking leggy in that second half. And all of a sudden, at one point, Graham Roberts kind of tried a silly little flick around the halfway line and lost the ball. QPR took advantage, came forward, put the ball in the box. Ray Clements came out, and ultimately at that point, QPR managed to just get a header that went over the bar. But it was a real warning and a real sign that they were going to start turning the screw. And they really did that. And Ray Clements was being forced into a lot of work in that second half and really had to be on his toes and, prove to be the great goalkeeper and the legend that he was for the club. And like I say, QPR just kept growing into the game from there, to be honest. And Spurs just couldn't string two passes together. We were looking to try and get Archibald or Crooks away over the top, but it just wasn't coming off at all. And then all of a sudden, after about 20 minutes of the second half, QPR again came forward. They hit a ball over to the far side of the box, and John Gregory, who would later go on to become Aston Villa manager, as you might know, he played a delicate chip. And whether it was a cross or a chip, who knows? Only he'll know. But it looked like a delicate chip that was sailing towards the far post over Clemence's head. But thankfully for Spurs, the ball managed just to crash against the crossbar and stay out, and we managed to keep our lead. Now, the game went on like this, QPR just pressing forward. Spurs weren't really managing to get their foot on the ball at all. But by the time the sort of 70th minute come around, obviously, as you'd expect, QPR now were coming forward in droves. And we were starting to find ourselves a bit of space over the top. And if it was for some better passes at the time from Hoddle and the likes of Hazard or Brook, who came on to replace Mickey Hazard in midfield, there was a chance that we could always get ourselves away, get Crooks or Archibald away. But QPR just wouldn't go away, and they kept pressing forward. And ultimately, as the clock was ticking down, we were hanging on, some great defending. I mean, at one point, Paul Miller made a brilliant block, possibly around the sort of 80th minute, to stop John Gregory having what probably would have been a simple tap in to clear it for a corner. And Miller was pulling off block after block towards the end of the game. It looked like, as the clock was ticking down, it looked like Spurs were going to be able just to get this win over the line and hang on to win the FA Cup. And in the very dying minute, we managed to get Archibald away and beat the offside trap. And he was one-on-one with the goalkeeper, Hucker, at the time. And he manages to try and slot the ball under Hucker. But when you look back at it, it was a decent save, to be honest. And the ball manages to trickle and hit the post, which obviously would have been harsh on QPR to end up losing 2-0 with that last-minute goal. But what it did do was it run the clock down enough. And before you knew it, QPR tried to attack at the other end. We get a goal kick. Clemence clears it and the referee blew his whistle. And Spurs thankfully went on to retain the FA Cup that they'd won the year before and win it for the 7th time in that iconic yellow kit. And as you'll know, Steve Perryman, who was brilliant on the night, went up to pick up the FA Cup. And it, was just a momentous evening, one that sent the fans home happy. And like I say, even in them games, even if you don't win it or don't play pretty football and win it convincingly, just getting it over the line was amazing and a great feeling. That was the first in this series of looking back at some Spurs classics. If you were there on that night, let me know how it felt. Let me know what you thought of the game. Do you remember much of it? Do you remember us hanging on the way we were? How good was it seeing Steve go up and lift in the FA Cup? And at the time, thinking back-to-back FA Cups, 7 times we've won this now. An amazing feeling. One, let's hope we can replicate that sometime soon. Hopefully this season, but if not, in a season to come very soon. We'll be back again with another classic match next week. As always, come on you Spurs. Hit that like and subscribe button. And like I say, leave some comments around if you remember this game.